Did you know that a single war reshaped the world in ways we still feel today? Yes, World War I wasn't just a battle of trenches and tanks. It completely redrew the lines of our planet. Borders vanished, new nations were born, and empires that had stood for centuries crumbled into history. In this video, we're diving deep into how World War I changed the maps of the world forever. Trust me, by the end, you'll see the world in a whole new way. Let's get started. The world before the war. Before we get into the chaos of redrawing borders, let's take a moment to understand what the world looked like before 1914. Europe was dominated by powerful empires: the Austro-Hungarian Empire, the Ottoman Empire, the Russian Empire, and, of course, the German Empire. These were massive, multi-ethnic entities, where borders didn't reflect the people living within them. For example, Austria-Hungary was a patchwork of Germans, Hungarians, Slavs, and more, all held together by a fragile monarchy. The Ottoman Empire controlled vast territories in the Middle East, North Africa, and even parts of Europe, but it was already being called the sick man of Europe. And then there was the Russian Empire, a sprawling giant, stretching from Eastern Europe to the Pacific Ocean, trying to manage dozens of ethnic groups. The world was far from peaceful. Tensions were brewing. Nationalism was rising, particularly in the Balkans, where small nations like Serbia dreamed of uniting all Slavic people under one flag. Add to that a web of alliances between the major powers, and you had a powder keg just waiting for a spark. And in 1914, that spark came. The war and the fall of empires. When the war broke out, no one could have predicted just how destructive it would be. By the time the guns fell silent in 1918, the political map of the world was unrecognizable. For major empires, the Austro-Hungarian, Ottoman, Russian, and German, had either collapsed or were on their knees. Let's start with the Austro-Hungarian Empire. This empire's defeat in the war was the final nail in its coffin. After centuries of holding diverse groups together, the empire shattered into pieces. Austria and Hungary became separate nations. New countries like Czechoslovakia and Yugoslavia emerged, carving up the map of Central and Eastern Europe. For the first time, borders started reflecting ethnic groups more accurately, though not perfectly, as we'll see later. Next, the Ottoman Empire. Once a mighty force, the Ottomans had been in decline for decades. Their defeat in the war marked the end of their empire. The Treaty of Versailles in 1920, and later the Treaty of Lausanne in 1923, divided Ottoman territories. Modern-day Turkey was born, while the rest of its lands were carved up by the Allies. Britain and France took control of the Middle East, creating artificial borders that we'll talk more about soon. The Russian Empire also fell apart, but for different reasons. The war had pushed Russia to its limits, and the 1917 Bolshevik Revolution overthrew the monarchy. Russia lost huge chunks of its territory. Countries like Finland, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania gained independence. Poland, which had been partitioned by empires for over a century, re-emerged as a free nation. And finally, the German Empire. While Germany itself remained a country, its defeat in the war led to harsh penalties under the Treaty of Versailles. Germany lost its colonies and territories like Alsace-Lorraine, which were returned to France. The map of Europe was changing dramatically, but the changes didn't stop there. The Middle East's new borders. Now, let's zoom in on the Middle East, because this is where World War I's impact is still felt most strongly. Before the war, the Ottoman Empire controlled much of the region. After the war, the British and French stepped in, using something called the Sykes-Picot Agreement. This secret deal divided the Ottoman lands between them. Britain took control of modern-day Iraq, Jordan, and Palestine, while France got Syria and Lebanon. These new borders didn't consider the ethnic or religious groups living there. Kurds, Arabs, Sunni Muslims, Shia Muslims. They were all lumped together or split apart in ways that created tension. And these tensions haven't gone away. Just think about the ongoing conflicts in the Middle East. Many of them traced back to these artificial borders drawn after World War I. The creation of Palestine as a British mandate also set the stage for one of the most contentious issues of the 20th and 21st centuries, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. But that's a story for another time. For now, let's just say that the decisions made after World War I planted seeds of conflict that would last for generations. The rise of new nations. World War I didn't just break empires. It also created opportunities for new nations to rise. Take Czechoslovakia, for example. This new country combined Czechs and Slovaks into a single nation. Then there's Yugoslavia, which brought together Serbs, Croats, and Slovenes. The idea was to unite people with shared ethnic or cultural identities, but it wasn't always smooth sailing. In fact, some of these countries would later face their own struggles with unity and division. Poland's story is particularly fascinating. After over 100 years of being divided between Russia, Prussia, and Austria, Poland was reborn as an independent country. It was like a phoenix rising from the ashes of war. But Poland's borders were hotly contested, leading to conflicts with its neighbors in the years to come. And let's not forget about the League of Nations' role in shaping the post-war world. This international organization, a precursor to the United Nations, aimed to prevent future wars and manage disputes. While it had its flaws and ultimately failed to stop World War II, it represented a new way of thinking about global cooperation and governance. The seeds of future conflicts. The changes in borders didn't just resolve old problems, they created new ones. Let's take a closer look at some of the issues that arose. In Europe, the new borders often left minorities stranded in countries where they didn't feel they belonged. For instance, Germans found themselves living in Poland, Czechoslovakia, and other newly formed nations. This created resentment that would later be exploited by leaders like Adolf Hitler. Meanwhile, the Balkans remained a hotbed of tension. Yugoslavia's attempt to unite various ethnic groups under one nation didn't erase the deep-rooted divisions between them. These divisions would resurface violently in the 1990s, leading to the breakup of Yugoslavia and a series of brutal wars. And then there's the Middle East. The artificial borders drawn by the Allies didn't take into account the tribal, ethnic, and religious complexities of the region. This oversight has led to countless conflicts, from the rise of extremist groups to the ongoing struggle for Kurdish independence. The map may have been redrawn, but the wounds it left behind are still open. The global impact of a redrawn map. The impact of World War I's border changes wasn't confined to Europe and the Middle East. The war also reshaped Africa and Asia in significant ways. German colonies in Africa were handed over to the victorious Allied powers, creating new tensions between colonial rulers and the local populations. These changes set the stage for the decolonization movements that would sweep across the continent in the mid-20th century. In Asia, Japan emerged as a rising power, having seized German territories in the Pacific. This shift in influence sowed the seeds for future conflicts in the region, particularly during World War II. The redrawn map wasn't just a European story. It was a global one, with consequences that would shape the 20th century and beyond. Lessons from a redrawn world. So, what can we learn from how World War I changed the map of the world? First, it's clear that borders aren't just lines on a map. They're a reflection of power, identity, and history. Redrawing them can solve some problems, but it often creates new ones. The decisions made after World War I show the importance of understanding the cultural and historical context of the regions being divided. Second, the story of World War I's border changes is a reminder of the long-term consequences of war. The conflicts and tensions we see today in places like the Middle East and Eastern Europe are deeply rooted in decisions made over a century ago. Understanding this history can help us navigate the challenges of the present and build a more peaceful future. Finally, the lesson is clear. The world may never stop changing, but it's how we manage those changes that defines the course of history. If there's one takeaway from this incredible reshaping of the world, it's this. Every border tells a story, and every story is worth understanding.